Welcome to Sanguine Arts Locavart, the podcast that features interviews with local Twin Cities artists. This activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. I am your host, interdisciplinary performance artist Mary Prescott. Today we are speaking with Ritika Ganguly. Ritika is a transdisciplinary composer and social practice artist. As a South Asian composer and cultural anthropologist, Ritika's creative vision is to build alliances across musicianships, disciplines, and social locations. Her work ranges from avant folk music to performance installations and opera theater. Ritika's artistic practice searches for intimacy with sites that have traditionally been claimed by experts. Since 2016, she has combined ethnographic research with performance inside classical music, nonprofit, and academic spaces, exploring power and hierarchy while creating a praxis where the stories of ordinary citizens can be told. Through her LLC We Collab, she supports organizations and creative entrepreneurs with agile storytelling and helps academic programs humanize research by transforming scholarly content into performance content. For over 10 years, she has practiced the folk singing form of baul, a profound sonic language that conveys embodied experience through orally transmitted genres of music and poetry. Ritika trains with baul musicians in the villages of West Bengal, learning how to develop an interspecies politics of care through song. Her emergent works in cymatics prise open the raced, disabled, gendered, and sexualized dimensions of silence and sound making. Among Ritika's many awards are the McKnight Composers Fellowship, Minnesota Opera's Miniatures Composers Honor, and the University of Minnesota's Imagine Award for innovating forms of oral musical storytelling. Welcome, Ritika.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks so much for speaking with us today. I wanted to ask you about an award that you recently got with the Minnesota State Arts Board Arts Experiences to create participatory sound workshops with immigrant communities using poetry, music, and cymatics. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and about cymatics?
Yeah. So this is the Arts Experiences grant that I was awarded at the end of last year to do these intergenerational workshops with immigrant communities, marginalized communities, basically to I thought of this project as love songs in motion, kind of, and why I say motion is um, because this project is inspired by the emerging field of cymatics, which, cymatics is the science of, or like the study of visible audio frequencies. So when we make a sound and a listener hears it, there are these waves, the sound waves that form really cool patterns, and if we can see those patterns reflected on the wall or concrete surfaces, floor, wherever, they're really beautiful. And and as an artist, I saw so much creative possibility within the science of cymatics that I started looking at the art of cymatics, just to see how sound looks. And then from there, I kind of, started looking at the political possibilities of cymatics. What happens when we cannot rely on sound as a given, when sound is made illegible, let's say by authoritarian regimes, governments, or, by the corporate machinery, when we are saying something, but it is not heard, because we either don't have the mic or we don't have the seat at the table, for whatever reasons, if our stories are not heard, then how can we better hear each other? And how can we, as humans, relate to one another to amplify each other's stories, so
Right.
when legible forms of speaking are taken away from us, then how may we still hear each other? And this was kind of, this was a question that I was grappling with when I was reading Sarah Ahmed's book. She's a critical theorist, a feminist, who is, she's a really inspiring scholar. And I thought of this project as almost, a creative inquiry into that very important question she asks about regimes and about, power, who gets to be heard, who gets to speak, who gets to represent, and things like that. So this is kind of like, an understanding of that scholarly question, but in a fun way with people. So inviting this particular project that I'm going to be starting pretty soon, or like semi soon, uh, is we would invite Spanish speaking communities or Dari and Pashto speaking communities, Afghan, the new refugees, they're called the new Minnesotans. So Afghan families that we welcomed into Minnesota in the last 2 years since the rise of Taliban. So different language speakers uh, bringing in their favorite songs and poems, um, to look at how these poems and songs um, look. We know how they sound,
Hmm.
but how do different languages and poetry in different languages cast patterns on walls? And this is like, again, cymatics sort of uses um, sound visualizers. How do you, to in order to visualize sound, there are certain um, tools, like, if you stretch out a fabric, let's say on a bucket, it becomes like this tight surface off of which things can bounce, and it's a taut tight surface. So when you
Hmm.
put either spices on it or any light material like salt on it, and you use a really powerful speaker um, to direct sound at this particular bucket, the materials on that bucket will start bouncing because of the
Hmm.
sound waves.
Hmm.
Every time there is a sound made, there is air displaced, and so the vibrations create these kinds of jumping on and off. And then seeing that is absolutely, it's this exquisite pattern
Hmm.
that the salt just forms into, and it's basically your speech,
Hmm.
your song, that is forming those physical patterns.
Hmm.
um and over the last um, 2 or 3 years in solo and collaborative projects, I have, with the help of friends and collaborators, designed homemade sound visualizers from found objects. Um, so think yogurt tubs,
Hmm.
right? Or
Hmm.
laser pens, spices and buckets, like we talked about. And we have piloted these visualizers with the U of M students last year. So I had a um, um, residency at the College of Liberal Arts over 2023 to 2025, 2 years, and with Zoe Chanel and Professor Nida Sajid at the Department of South Asian Studies. We piloted these visualizers with university students and artists and kids aged 3 to 12 years. And those gatherings, they really pointed to the tremendous possibilities of individual and collective storytelling through the visibilizing of sound,
Hmm.
right? Um, so over this year, this new award, this new fund that I got awarded, I will be able to take that a little bit further, and use the art of cymatics to create this sort of a durational public composition experience with immigrant communities in Minnesota. Um, and yeah, this is kind of what we're thinking of doing. I would include and invite participants to bring to the space, excuse me, words, stories, poetry, and music from their cultures,
Mhm.
and then use these words and songs to vibrate specific cymatic materials in the workshop space, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
So, in addition to experiencing these stunning, visuals sort of generated live in real time by their musical tones and sound waves, I think that participants will leave, you know, with an awareness of the various different ways to evidence sound,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
how we can experience or evidence sound through our other four senses of sight, smell, taste, and touch. So yeah, all vocalizing and sound generation will be audio recorded, and it'll be produced in the end as a public composition of this sort of year-long workshop series.
Beautiful. That sounds so cool. I'm curious, and I have no idea what the answer is, but you probably do. Do the different languages that come into play, the different spoken languages, do they affect the, cymatic materials differently?
That is the experimental piece of it. But from what I have seen so far, over the last 2 years in using these cymatic materials, um, South Asian languages, Arabic languages, with different emphases on vowels and consonants and the way words trail off, the way you project when you say certain vowels. Um, the cymatic materials, especially this kind of the yogurt tub visualizer that I have, the more airy the
Mhm.
sound,
Mhm.
the more stunning the
Mm,
patterns
mm,
of those sound waves, because you're displacing more air. And some languages are just pitched lower, you just like when I speak Bangla, it's always very sort of this euphoric tone. It's like high pitched and it's shrill, and that doesn't excite the cymatic materials to the extent that when I'm speaking, let's say in Hindi, or like a specifically low tone, so the bass of the voice is captured better,
yeah.
and those can be seen as like these more gigantic ellipticals and ovals and big circles on the wall, and sometimes they'll just blend into one another. So yeah, the way we use language, the way we read a particular poem, and in what language, how yeah what is our sort of baseline pitch, all of that affects the 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 visuals.
Mhm. That makes sense actually because, the lower the frequency, the wider the sound wave, right? So
Yes,
maybe
yes.
that just makes it more dramatic.
Yeah, exactly. So last year, I was invited by the Bell Museum
Mhm.
to partner with them on, a Science of Sound event, and the average age of the museum visitor that day was 6. You know,
Hmm.
they were like kids from 2 through 8.
Cute.
There were 800 visitors that day. And I learned so many new things about how these materials behave.
Mm.
Um, when kids, sort of like when they're talking, they're also there's a lot of extra things, right? There's a lot of breath. There's a lot of breathiness in their talk. So even though their pitch is more shrill than adults talking on the mic, when they're talking and saying, I, and then they breathe in deeply, and then suddenly there'll be like this, absolutely exquisite shape of their breath on the wall, which will take all of us by surprise. So I think the more we do, the more experiments we conduct, the more uh, it becomes clear how these materials behave. Um, but I think salt and semolina, semolina is this very jumpy, dry material. So when you put that, when you pour the semolina on this tightly, um sort of this tight membrane over a bucket, and then you expose a mic or a speaker to that particular bucket, the semolina just dances in very different ways from
Mm,
salt. So it really
mm,
also depends on the materials. Anything that can hold moisture like salt will behave differently than the drier materials, you
mhm.
know.
I
Um,
suppose it's heavier too.
yeah, yeah, it's heavier. And then even, powdered spices. Um, when I did that, when I worked with powdered spices for the first time for my piece called I Am Here at the Red Eye,
Mhm.
gosh, it's been 3 years to that piece also. Uh, the space just, I mean, it just felt like a kitchen, you know, and no one was touching these spices, but the spices were doing this dance entirely triggered by sound. And I had used spices that were, that are close to me and to my sort of food habits and my nostalgia and my experience of home. So cumin, and what else? Coriander powder, garam masala. It was just like a full on kitchen happening, and all I was doing was singing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very exciting to me how this like fields that are known as like scientific subjects uh open up so many different possibilities in so many different disciplines, and that's kind of where my transdisciplinary brain also goes.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that project because you just brought it up. The I am here spelled I-E-Y-E, the word am, and then here, H-E-A-R.
Hmm.
I am here. And you were just talking about, how you introduced the smells and the spices from your homeland. Can you tell me a little bit more about that project and how it's related to the cymatic work that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So that project, I think I started thinking about that in the summer of 2022. So COVID times, right? Where all of us, I think, artists or not, we were forced to think about distance, and closeness and proximity and home, outside, inside, questions like that. And that was also the summer that had just returned from India, having participated in this, one of the biggest social movements in recent history. This was the, citizenship protests. The government was trying to amend a citizenship bill and make that into law, that would, reconfigure um, demographics of who is allowed to live on that landmass called India.
Mm,
So, it was a very paperwork centric, show us the papers, prove to us that you are citizens, prove to us that your parents were born before or after this year. And,
mm,
most of like, most births in India are not really documented in like, birth certificates. So this was a very difficult thing for people to prove, especially when the onus of proving citizenship all of a sudden after being citizens for, 75 years of independent India, you were asked to prove the citizenship. So essentially it really was um, sort of enhancing and expanding the rights of the Hindu majority, which I'm a part of. I'm a Hindu by birth. Um, and it was an anti-Muslim, anti-poor piece of legislation. So
Mhm.
it was a very big protest, and it just caught on, in every corner of the country, metropolitan cities, smaller towns, villages. Everyone, was sort of grappling with this idea of overnight having to prove yourself as belonging to that
Yeah.
place.
Right.
And so I had participated in those protests, saw just how the government was trying to quash the chants and our demands. Right, we were out on the streets. And protests in India, of course, look very different from protests in the US. Um, there's no picket fences. There's a lot of charged energy. Music is a big part of it. There's like masses, just the sheer like density of the population, right?
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
talking
Mhm.
like hundreds of and thousands of people just sitting on the street, trying to disrupt business as usual. So I had just returned from 3 months of participating in these protests in different cities, not just Delhi, which is my hometown, but yeah, smaller towns and villages. And I had returned, I think, on probably the last um, legal flight out of India before
Mm.
everything shut down for the pandemic,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then looking at, the sort of how those protests were journeying, and how the pandemic kind of brought about this distance, and the government mostly termed this protest noisy and tried to silence it. So I was thinking a lot about, what gets labeled as noise, because once you label something as noise, you are in the right to turn it down, to dial it down, right? So by calling these protests noisy and by silencing these protests, what are you not hearing? Who's not being heard? All those kinds of questions.
Mhm.
Simultaneously, I was grappling with a medical diagnosis
Mm.
where the vision in one eye started to dip. Um, and biomedicine doesn't really have a good reasoning for why this is happening. I mean, I found uh, you know better explanatory frameworks in Chinese medicine and acupuncture, in Ayurveda, to explain what was happening. But biomedicine just doesn't have an understanding. It's of course a young science, and it didn't really have an understanding of why this was happening, but they knew what they had to do, which is like this blanket monthly
Mhm.
injection sort of an answer. Like, think of it as a steroid.
Okay. Mhm.
So I was really moved by this one encounter I had with my ophthalmologist, who is this fantastic doctor who is patient with me, who's caring, and has all the qualities of being a great doctor and a human. um, and she was trying to explain to me what was going wrong, with my macula and with the retina and all of that. And and I just couldn't see what she was trying to show me, because I was trying to use the sense organ of the eye to make sense of the eye, and it just wasn't working out. And so my way of trying to understand what was going wrong with my eye was actually through sound, because I started thinking of the sound of the eye is as being like this um, living, thriving ecosystem, that, like everything else, all other processes in our body, all other processes in the universe have a sound.
Mhm.
There is a soundscape, maybe not audible in the way that we catch frequencies. Um, and so uh, this red eye opportunity came along. I was invited to be a part of the Isolated Acts cohort. And of course, all of this was, top of mind for me. I was processing that social movement. I was processing this diagnosis and thinking about sound and, home and distance in very, very deep ways that I never really, I wasn't ever pushed to think about these things in quite that way.
Mhm.
Um, and I sort of boiled down to all of it was about sound and distance. And so when I started sort of thinking about the enforced silences, and then my inability to comprehend the diagnosis, uh, I wanted to take one creative leap and, sort of think of my eye as having a particular soundscape. And then every time there is a hemorrhaging blood vessel, because that's how I was explained the thing is that, there's new blood vessels developing in the eye. We don't want those vessels to hemorrhage, but they are. There's nothing we can do about it, but here is the diagnosis, so like no answers, but like a descriptive analysis. And so I wanted to, understand the hemorrhaging as having, um, an equivalent acoustic of its
Mhm.
own.
Hmm.
Um, so then if I think of the eye as a particular soundscape, then what is happening when there's a hemorrhage? So I made a whole like piece of it um with my collaborator Zoe Chanel. Um and yeah, I think that was the only way that I could understand those 200 angiograms taken of my eye is by relying on other sense organs, you
Huh.
know,
Huh.
and this constant sort of, crossing over of the sensorium.
Uh-huh.
How do you think of the function of one sense through the other? And then, more questions opened up in terms of, well, if we can't see it, then can we hear it? Can we touch it? Can we smell it? And then, cymatics sort of came as this um, almost like, a kind of a catalyst
Mhm.
that could hold all of these different questions that I was having as a, artist who makes political art, as an activist, um, yeah, as a woman, as an anthropologist. I think so, all of these things kind of coalesced into that project. And then I got so into this whole sort of understanding of sound as how you can see it, um, that it then, you know started bringing more projects, more opportunities, and more people who were interested in this project as well.
Speaking of your work within the community, over this summer and fall, you're gonna be convening intergenerational community walks to unveil the hidden soundscape in our built and wild environment. What is it that you're hoping to explore and reveal with your participants, and what inspired the project?
So this project I have finally named as listening to the soundscape of the landscape. So yeah, just this idea that sound is not passive. It is a feedback loop, right? It doesn't matter if a sound is made. It gains any meaning at all when it is heard or experienced by us, right? So when I conceived this project, I was kind of approaching sound with a beginner's mind as a,
Mhm,
as a discovery, as experimenting, mostly asking the question, what happens if we looked at our built environment and our natural environment as large scale kinetic sound sculptures? You know,
mhm,
um, how does it change how we understand place, how we understand space, human intervention in nature, how we understand the land we live on, who we live with, and what we live amidst, you know?
mhm.
And so, yeah, it's basically this started with the residency I was doing at the Tofty Lake Center.
Mhm.
This beautiful space with bringer togetherer par excellence, Liz Engelman. I love her. So there, um, as part of this residency, I was just we were taking a walk with the residency cohort. We were 6 artists. I think 4 of us were just walking to this lake called the Ojibwe Lake by the Tofty Lake up in Ely, and we're we are walking through Bear Scat, and all of the things that you would expect to see in the Superior National Forest, and then we hear this beautiful sound of the flute. Okay, I follow it, and the closer I get to that beautiful melody, the further away I got from civilization and into the lake. And so I was very puzzled at, as
What's making that sound?
right. Um, and then I tried looking for someone who was playing a flute. It really looked like, someone holding, maybe like an Andean flute or something. Very specific kind of pitch changes in that melody. Um, but the closer I got to the melody, the closer I got to this concrete metal pole, this nondescript pole that was holding a dog down. Okay.
What was it holding?
The dock, the pier,
Yeah, 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 uh-huh.
it was just one of those things that was helping like pin it down. That pier, and I'm like, this can't be real. Uh, and it was a very windy day, and that particular lake, Ojibwe Lake, it's just the formation is such that you'll just see the winds coming in, and then I realized that that pole that the wind was hitting had 5 holes, right? Um, Somewhat akin to a flute, but not exactly because it wasn't closed on one end. There was a hole running right through the pole. So if you can imagine like this cylindrical structure, right? There's an air column inside of it, and the wind is running perpendicular to that and hitting the pole and the air column inside it and changing the pitch. So it was going like not exactly these notes, but something like that. And it was just pure music that the wind was creating um, by whistling, right? And so then, of course, I had to go back to the lake a couple more times during my stay at the Tofty Lake Center. Um, and then I ended up, sort of graphically notating that it was on the key of C, and I ended up notating that whole wind song and gave it as a gift to the Tofty Lake Center. But when I came back, I mean, of course, this experience just stayed in me. It's just one of those embodied things that doesn't really leave you. And I knew I wanted
Yeah.
to explore wind a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, so so that was, my initial impetus for the project, is that I wanted to invite more people, do these, walks, kind of random walks in our neighborhoods, or, in like regional parks or nature centers within the Twin Cities, and really look at hear all this music that is unheard, right? Because there
Mhm.
some of the most extraordinary sounds surrounding our ordinary lives, right? So then, what does the land we live on become if we were to hear it? And how can the act of listening to our landscape in each other's presence, there's something about doing it with each other rather than like the solitary activity where you're going off with like a recording setup on your own. It feels really different when you're doing it in a group, sharing what you hear with other people, and then notice presence, right?
Mhm.
Notice what is gone, appreciating what remains. and that kind of thing. And as with every other project, Mary, I'll tell you this, like so many of my projects start out with, this kind of question in my head, but they transform when I talk to friends about it.
Yeah.
Um, and I was talking about this project with my friend Emily Baxter, who um, is the director at the criminal justice nonprofit We Are All Criminals. And I'm endlessly inspired by her thinking, and 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 her work in the world. Uh, so she had invited me over for dinner, and for 4 hours we talked about projects and what we are reading, what we are learning from the books we are reading, etc. So when I was talking to her about this project, she introduced a whole other very meaningful layer, and that is what now I can see the project becoming. Is that she said, Ritika, what about like given the infestation in our state earlier this year, the federal insurgents, um, places like Powderhorn Park, and our own neighborhoods, right? They have become sites of pain,
Mm.
um, because we have seen and experienced so much separation, so much disappearance, right? And the grief of disappearance is kind of ambiguous, right? It's ambiguous grief. You don't know how long
Mhm.
to grieve for. You don't know what you are grieving,
Mhm.
if the person will be back. And it's so ambiguous that
Mhm.
that's the
There's no
pain.
closure on it.
Exactly. Um, so how does one transform that experience of, Bloomington Avenue? Like when you walk down Bloomington and 26th, or whatever, like any intersection, right? It has a certain meaning for you. So can you use this project to transform how people feel about these streets and avenues? So can this somewhere, the fact that the wind is producing these extraordinarily beautiful melodies which we cannot always pick up, um, with the human ear, uh, how can we hear something that exists, and how can that bring back a sense of presence and resonance, and turn this site of pain into a site of a positive memory, you
Mhm.
know Um, and so now it's kind of taking that shape where I'm no longer going into far off nature centers. I'm no longer looking at, Crosby, the Crosby Park, which has, beautiful, like marshy landscape, where I was initially planning to do this, the recording of the wind and invite people to listen to the wind. I am now looking at regular, traffic intersection metal poles, right? I'm looking at electricity pylons,
Mm.
or abandoned granaries around, grain elevators around us. And so basically, the sound of the musical sound of wind vibrating through taut objects
Mhm.
around us, taut objects like metal fence lines, telegraph poles, those metal pipes holding down docks, on our lakes, everyday plant processes, the call of a stressed plant. Um, so yeah, so that's what I'm trying to create, is maybe 3 to 4 experiences in embodied listening to the urban wild. And I'll start inviting, participants to that, end of summer.
Mhm.
And this project will run for a couple of months, because also, we're kind of limited by the weather, like how
Sure.
long we can be outdoors.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know where this will go, but this is what I'm thinking about right
Hmm.
now.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I have a couple more questions about that actually, and one of them goes back to where you kind of started the whole idea. Did the folks at Tofty Lake know that there was this sort of, happenstance flute on their
No. Right? They didn't. I recorded that, but because I had, I didn't have the best equipment. I really just had my iPhone on me. The problem with phones picking up these tunes is that, they pick up more of the wind noise.
Mhm.
And you can't, you know, post produce that. You can't mix and master in any way. It's like one single file. But beneath all the sort of overpowering sound of the wind or noise of the wind, you could hear a very you could hear a latent melody for sure. And when people were tuning in to that, they got even more interested. And so the next day, of course, we all went as a bigger group to that flute. Um, and now Liz tells me that, her ears are always open for how the wind is producing music around her. And then she told me of another like friend of hers who lives by Lake Ojibwe.
Mhm.
And she said, "Oh my God, we always thought that it was actually players, like people, indigenous
Wow.
folks." Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then
That's funny.
yeah, and then they went back to the concrete and they said, "I don't know if this, maybe we shouldn't have known the source of the sound." And because romanticizing about someone playing is just so much nicer than looking at, the tang, 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 like a metal. Yeah, it just strips all that, the enchantment away. But I think that's even more extraordinary is that,
Yeah.
when you see something like a holiday gas station, that has something like a chain that's totally intended for a different purpose. Um, and that's causing a surface vibration on the pole that is hitting like, 20 times a minute. Um, the the vibration of the pole is again a really, really beautiful excuse me, sound,
Mhm.
um
Yeah, and it's kind of like a way it's there there are sonic moments of beauty in this kind of, like, urban or, like, man-made, setting.
yeah, exactly. And we don't think of human made structures as producing such beauty
Mhm,
unless it's specifically for the purpose of art.
mhm,
Otherwise we look at our built environment in terms of functionality,
right, mhm.
right? It's there because it's serving a purpose. um but yeah, it's really quite beautiful where we live. And what does it mean to do a collective musical exploration with people, um through this intentional listening? And also BIPOC communities access to outdoors has been limited. Um so then how does one, and I have, a lot of us have relationships with um BIPOC creative communities as well. So then, doing, these workshops with self-identifying BIPOC artists and non-artists, um, and being in the outdoors, out and about doing something that is like sound experimenting, um, might be a cool experience. I don't know what to expect, but we'll see how it goes.
I think it's gonna be fabulous. And I know that you will have participants, and I'm wondering if people who are listening are interested in participating somehow or getting involved with the project, how could they do that?
Yeah, so I will have a website coming up shortly, and I'm going to. Um, so the website will have, information about the sites, the
Mhm.
3 or 4 walk sites or gathering sites, and it will have a link to the Google form where people can sign up. There will be, I mean, all my engagements have like either chai or soup or rice as part of the deal. Um, so
That's a nice deal.
so people will have a chance to yeah, pick, how, let me know how many people are coming so that I can arrange for food and chai and snacks and all of that. And that website will be, I'll sort of be promoting that with the help of local arts organizations. And that's the beautiful thing about the Twin Cities arts community. Also, I feel that once you've had, or at least in my experience, if I've had some kind of a, relationship with an arts organization, they really will, promote you, uplift your work, toot your horn, and like let everyone know about your project. So I know that I will be advertising this on um, different arts organizations, social media, and there will be announcements everywhere. But I'm also working closely with the BIPOC Outdoors Twin Cities group on
Hmm.
this,
Hmm.
the Eloise Butler Wildflower Garden, and art spaces such as, the Red Eye Theater, Afghan Cultural Society, and the various puppetry groups. I know these are groups that have, shown interest uh, in the project, but also in marketing and outreach and publicizing the project. So I'm hoping that, this will be announced on social media platforms and newsletters once I have dates for it. But I will be sure to, put all of this information on like one landing page.
Hmm.
Because when we talk about something like this, it can sound a little bit confusing. Like, what are we going to do? What are we, what's the outcome of this project? What's it going to look like? So all of that will be, I
It'll come together.
hopefully, yeah, addressed in that like website or whatever. Yeah.
I think that's the way that so many of us artists work is like we have these kernels of ideas and then and then somehow like, the nucleus doesn't form until the end.
Right.
But it will be there. I know it
It's
will be.
just a process.
Yeah, but it all sounds so lovely and such a nice way to bring people together, and to explore and listen together, and I think there's something really powerful about that intentional, attention to what's
Mhm.
happening, around us, and to use our senses in that very focused way. Um, yeah, I
Mhm.
think it's really, really great. Um, how many people are you expecting or do you think are gonna participate? Or are you
I'm
limiting it?
I'm limiting it to groups of 4 to 5
Okay.
per walk, just because, we'll be sharing the equipment. The equipment we'll be using is a very basic setup of contact mics, um, and, one sort of field recorder. And then there'll be a couple of headphone sets, right? And I am deliberately not investing in 5 different, headsets or contact mics for 5 people,
Mhm.
because I want that discussion and that, sort of circle, like talking in a circle with each other, that sort of collective experience to be shared. Because if all of us are listening on our individual headsets, then what are we talking about? We are experiencing, but we're not sharing that.
Yeah, there's a
But
separation.
right, there is a separation. So the idea is to break that isolation and really listen together.
Mhm.
Um, Even though the best listening experience really comes with a headphone. But I feel like all of the spaces that I have piloted this sort of testing, this equipment in, um, I don't see them the same way anymore. So now when I go to the Powderhorn Park, I'm I my ears just bring back to me that melody that I heard on the headset, and it just makes the place just that much more textured, that much more alive, because I
Mhm.
know there's so much more happening than I'm picking up through my sense organs,
Mm.
so it just changes your relationship with that. place.
Mm.
It's hard to unhear it,
Yeah, yeah.
you
You're
know?
actually reminding me of, a sound that I heard. This was, like, quite a few years ago now, but, I was taking a walk in the park, and then I was hearing this, like, repetitive squeaking, and it had pitches. It was pitched. It was like, "Doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo,
Oh,
doo-doo,"
wow.
and it just continued, and I followed that sound, and it was a, kids swinging on a swing set.
Uh-huh.
It was the squeaking of the chain rubbing at the top of the connection.
Right, right, right.
And anyway, I recorded it because I found it very special, and, ended up using it in a piece.
You did!
Yeah,
Look
yeah,
at
yeah, yeah, I
that.
transcribed it, yeah.
I love
Anyway.
that. Mhm. Yeah, parks
And
is actually a great place, like when I go with my child, he's now 10, but he loves harmonizing with park swings and park equipment, like squeak old.
yeah, and even as an adult, those the at the park, I don't know what you call them, but they have the tubes that run from, like, one end of the playground to the other, and then there's a
Yeah,
little,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
place that you can speak into and listen from. I
Huh?
love that. I
Yeah,
think it's the coolest toy in the
right.
world. Anyway, I think you and I are both, we're both on the wonder train.
I love this for Asians and South Asians so much more, because I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, um, the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, right, in the US, that has kind of defined or like circumscribed my community's relationship to technology, like South
Uh-huh,
Asians' relationship to tech. Kind of like all of it is predetermined by the Silicon Valley right now, right? Like our
uh,
value as tech labor, as software, you know, um, but not as people who are leading science experiments,
hmm,
and
hmm,
that's why I feel like the field of experimental sound and music is so like it's historically dominated by white Western, often male artists, right? Um, and I know a lot of your work also intervenes in that hegemonic structure, Mary, which is what I love about your work, because you are spearheading that kind of like you know um, experiments with sound, and I really love seeing this kind of work by artists who are like hyphenated identities or Asian artists, South Asian artists. It's really uplifting to see all this in such a white male um, system of experimental sound work.
yeah, for sure, and thank you for saying that, and I think I could say the same thing to you, about all the things that you're doing. It's like pushing against this. Everybody talks about this glass ceiling, but you know what? It really
Yeah.
it really is that, and we're still doing it. And when we're talking about, like, recording,
Uh-huh.
I feel like, I'm very, I've sort of just started learning about recording, audio recording, and, like, audio tech, and I feel like, that world has never really been open or available to us or people like us.
Mhm.
That's also another one of these, like, very, Eurocentric, male-dominated industries, and, yeah, anyway, good for us.
Yeah, good for us. Exactly.
I wanted to talk about, your South Asian folk opera, The Mushroom That Swallowed the Moon Whole, which you produced in 2024, about climate colonialism and migration as seen from outer space. Can
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit more about that opera?
Yeah, so that was in 2024. when we presented it at the Luminary Arts Center at the Minnesota Opera, um, the the project began with a professor at the U of M reaching out to me saying, "Hey, I saw your fantastic work called Xylem, which was Minnesota Opera miniatures, like a 20-25 minute video opera." uh, During the pandemic, she was very excited about what she saw and the questions it raised for climate action and artists' take on people's apathy. And yeah, so that story, Xylem, was about this you know tree, this people tree, a 200-year-old tree, which was not able to pull its nutrients from the soil because there's only dead people. Like when people die in that world of the opera, of the story, um, people were sort of just buried underground. And um, because the tree had such an extensive root network all over the world, she wasn't able to move from her place. And she always saw travelers, um, enjoy the sweet shade of her canopy. Um, and she saw people walk by. The world kind of lived, the world always walked her by, and she was always, standing in place, kind of rooted in one place. So she wished also that she could um, mobilize herself just like her story listeners.
Mhm.
And she was like this grand storyteller of a tree. So anyway, so this professor was very inspired by that opera, and she reached out to me and she said, there are these U of M faculty driven grants, which means that only faculty can apply to them. Do you want to collaborate with me on those? So I said, yes, of course. So she said, can you write the proposal? And I was very excited also to, collaborate with the South Asian Studies professor at the U. And because I'm an alumni of the U, I've had like lasting and really good relationships with different departments across the U system. Um, so anyhow, I wrote the project proposal. We got both the grants that we applied for. We got the money we needed to produce this opera. This opera that ultimately, came to be known as The Mushroom That Swallowed the Moon Whole was also, similar theme. That tree in this opera kind of becomes a mushroom, which is also so uh, tied to her mycelial network. She's tied not just physically, but emotionally
Mhm.
and spiritually to this network. Um, and she's also experiencing the polluted soil. Her spores are not able, this mushroom, right, she's not able to reproduce the way she knows to. And then she befriends this child in her part of the forest, who has had a completely opposite story to her. The the child actually wants to be in one place. What the child wants to. It's an Adivasi kid. It's an indigenous kid growing up in the forests of central India. So the story basically follows this interspecies friendship of the mushroom and her human friend, who have completely different perspectives on migration and movement and mobility and groundedness, because of their experiences in life. So the child has only seen his family move from place to place. They're migrant workers, so they migrate seasonally to the nearest metro city, and then they come back to that patch of the forest that the government will never let them call their own, you know. So
Mhm.
so the child looks at the mushroom and says, "You're so lucky, you know, do you know your privilege?" And the mushroom looks at the child and says, "Do you know your privilege? You know, you can migrate all the time, and you can, you know, you can choose work, you can choose your place of stay. Look at me. I am just having to deal with the consequences of, you know, climate collapse, and what am I supposed to do here?" So while the child and the mushroom are telling you know, each other their stories and their aspirations of how they want to move or how they want to stay rooted, the two of them uh, experience, you know, they witness together the climate event of their lives, and that is this billionaire class that is queuing up to go to the moon, to
Uh-huh.
colonize the moon. And
Uh-huh.
once it becomes clear to the child and her mushroom friend that this is what is happening, and the moon, you know, is a common friend in this story. They both, the child writes nightly letters to the moon. The mushroom has always seen the moon, you know, through like the time of the dinosaur killing asteroid. The moon has been the mushroom's best friend. And when they see that after, you know, the devastation and destruction that humans have caused on Earth, they are now planning to do the same to the moon. When they realize the import of what is happening, they they try to protect their friend, the moon, and the mushroom just wants to rise from her position and say, "I'm just going to swallow up the moon. That way, you know, I can be the barrier between the humans and the and the surface of the moon." And then
Mhm.
the child says, "No, Kia, you can't do that, because once you know, once you uproot yourself from the mycelial network, you are nothing without the network. You're dead and gone. You will lose your breath. Um, you can't do this independently. You can't do this as you know, one entity. We have to do it together." And the mushroom is just like carried away by the lining up of the people who are now, you know, taking their whatever spaceship to the moon, that she just decides to extricate herself from the network, and she gobbles up, you know, the moon, and she dies because she dared to leave the collective, you know.
Mhm.
So, and then, you know, the child sort of becomes um this real life conservationist, Sonam Wangchuk, who has, you know, inspired so many communities in India. He has made, you know, these ice stupas, which are basically um, these, you know, very agile systems of conserving glaciers and, you know, glacial ice. So you form them into mountains, and when spring or summer comes and the, you know, these little artificial glaciers melt, they provide the locally needed water to that area. So Sonam Wangchuk is like a legend when it comes to climate action. So then I show that this child grows up to become Sonam Wangchuk, you know. So yeah, it's basically, you know, taking from grassroots activism, climate activism in South Asia. It has, you know, I took advice from indigenous climate activists here. I did a climate residency in Santa Fe. You know, I spoke with some indigenous folks at the Pueblo, and that was, yeah. So, you know, it sort of took narrative histories, it took local histories, local memories, and then made a kind of like, you know, fantastical story out of
Mhm.
that, extending that earlier piece on the tree, the xylem.
What a cool piece.
Yeah, so I just lucked out as far as the team goes, you know. there were um, there were puppeteers. So the voice of the moon, even though the moon didn't have any words or like songs uh, to sing herself, the voice of the moon here was mm, the sand drawing artist and puppeteer Sofia Padilla, who's a very good friend, and she made the moon talk. And this moon sculpture was kind of like this, 10 feet in diameter, huge, like circle kind of descending from the ceiling of the space at the Luminary Arts. And it was hovering over the whole stage design, so it was witnessing the story being told. And when it was the moon's turn to talk back, Sophia was projecting the sand art on the moon.
Wow.
So yeah, it was just so gorgeous. I still get goosebumps thinking about just how beautiful that whole team just coming together and bringing their best. And yeah, all the storytellers just like, took charge of the story. Yeah, I really loved that production. I hope we get a chance to do it again.
Yeah, I hope so too. What's the instrumentation for it?
So very minimal instrumentation. There was the tabla played by Abhinav. There was a sarod played by Praful Kelkar. Both, sounds, I mean, kind of like, South Asian instruments, both folk and classical South Asian music, use them a lot. Then the harmonium, which I was playing, which I don't know if you have time to go into the history of the harmonium and its decoloniality in India, but yeah, the harmonium, a very contested instrument in India.
Hmm.
um, then the piano played by May Klug, she brought in, jazz phrasing to the music, and yeah, it was so vibrant. The cello played by Cam Fassett, guitar by Shinjan Sengupta, who was also the librettist for the piece, um, and voice. So there was the narrator, who is this illustrious black storyteller, Vuzumuzi Zulu. Um, and he is this, grandfather character for me. I've known him for 20 years.
Hmm.
The first year I moved to the US, he was kind of this like big tree that said, come under my shade. Yeah,
How apropos.
yeah, right. And I was thrilled that he said yes to the opera. So he brought it all together. He was the narrator of the piece. And then there was Clay Mansu, who's an Asian theater maker. He's now moved to California, but yeah, he was the child in the opera. Um, and Sophia Padilla. At the stage design was done by Joshua Martin. And it was, of course, the lighting. Heidi Ekwall, brilliant with her craft. And the artistic director, I really could not have wished for a better director to just guide this whole story. Masanari Kawahara, who's a Buto artist and um, theater maker, movement artist. Yeah, it was such a fantastic team.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and it sounds like, you know, f I mean, when we're dealing with opera, um, you're always dealing with something big.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
that takes a lot of, community to bring it together. And I wanted to ask you too, because speaking of that, just as you were getting ready to premiere the opera, you became entrenched in a difficult situation, with a funder who had promised support. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that, what happened and how it's all turned out. And now that you're almost 2 years out from that project, so just curious, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would love to. And now I think I'm in the clear to talk about it. Um, so yeah, you must have seen that Kickstarter campaign that I had to start just 4 weeks before the event. Uh, the professor who had invited me to collaborate on this particular event with her pulled all the funding, and it is still not clear, like even after hearing her in court sort of try to give her reasoning as to what, I'm still not able to piece together why this happened. But so there was these two grants that were awarded. These are faculty driven grants, so really
Hmm.
the community collaborator uh, is kind of outside the system.
Hmm.
And so even though, all of this is, we had like reams and reams of like 2 years worth of written correspondences, um, the the funding was just pulled off, and we don't know. It was just a vague phrase like budgetary and ancillary requirements. And when I tried asking, what those requirements were, um, all I got was crickets. There was no response to any email. So it was done very unilaterally.
Hmm.
Um,
You
and
got
then,
ghosted.
huh?
I said, sorry, you got ghosted.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I tried going through the sort of um, set university pathways to register these grievances, or understand what is happening. So there's the U reports, where one could report. I tried all of these things, and then I have many friends who are teaching right now at the U, and in different capacities, you know dean of a department, or like in HR, or, and I've been like trying to understand how can this happen. But the thing about university is that it is a mammoth organization, right? It's also pretty opaque, if it
Hmm.
wants to be.
Hmm.
And so if people are saying that this grievance was addressed at our end, we have reviewed the matter and the file is closed, that is all I got, without really, so what do you mean the file is closed? I have raised a complaint. Please tell me, where is the money? That was
Yeah.
my like first question, is that I have all the written documentation that says, we got the grant, let's go ahead with the event. And um up to you know August 20th, the final show was September 21st and 22nd. Up to August 20th, everything was going okay.
Hmm.
What changed? Yeah, so I didn't get any answers. Springboard for the Arts has Minnesota Lawyers for the Arts program, which I'll say for the benefit of our audiences, is really fantastic. They helped me. So they do all the back end work of
Hmm.
matching you with a lawyer who doesn't have a conflict of interest.
Mm.
Um, but also, the challenge here is that this is the University of Minnesota. It's the biggest employer in the state, right?
Yeah.
Many
Yeah.
lawyers are retained by the U. So 90% of the, I mean, I'm just throwing that number out there. It's not like, um, um, may not be statistically accurate, but I felt like, almost 90% of the lawyers have a conflict of interest because they either would have helped the U at some point, or are in the process of, or they're just retained,
Hmm. Yeah, or
So
affiliated somehow.
right.
Yeah, so
Um,
you're in a real, like, David and Goliath situation.
Totally, totally. And it took about 2 to 3 months to just arrive at someone who had no conflict of interest and who understood the case. And then she, also thanks to the springboard, she was able to lead a lot of the negotiations, the settlement negotiations. I tried settling with the U, like an out of court settlement. But the offer they gave was so woefully inadequate and insulting. When you have received um, upwards of $15,000 to produce an opera, and you are offered 5,000 as settlement. It's humiliating. And so I we had to reject that, and there was a pretty big like non-disclosure argument that I would never be able to talk about it, and that this case would be completely settled. And so that wasn't agreeable at all, because it was a lose-lose for me, and also because I wanted to really understand like what
Yeah.
happened to the professor, what happened to the promises, what exactly, because as an artist you want to know what not to do in your next
Mm,
collaboration, right? So
mm,
there was that learning that I was seeking here. And as you can imagine, Mary, like before a production, you want to be like 100%, you want to pour 100% of you into creativity, into like producing that thing, and not have
right,
to worry
right.
about chasing funds, which was a given. So at that time, I had to completely pivot from rehearsals and the end stage, lighting, this, that, and 100 other things when you're creating an opera, uh, to really finding out, well, who will be my angel, who will fund this. So then I started, speaking to many community leaders. A lot of people helped. A lot of people said, well, if you start a campaign, then like allow us to back this project, right? Like we want to support, we want to back this project. So then came the question of like, okay, let's then formalize this as a backer pledge, so that I started the Kickstarter, etc. Um, and the community poured into it, but with all of the, I had 6 reward tiers. Like Kickstarter campaign is no joke. It takes a lot of your
It's
time.
a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So
Mm,
it took so much of my energy, my
mhm,
creative energy, into just managing the campaign,
mhm,
and building the rewards. You're promising a voice lesson to somebody, you're promising, a food, lunch, homemade lunch as a reward to some, and people are contributing in various capacities,
mhm.
meeting the various different reward tier needs. And while I was, very uplifted and warmed by the care of the community, I also lost out a lot of time. So anyway, that campaign proved to be more. Um,
More
it
work.
wasn't commensurate with my efforts. Yeah, at that
Yeah.
time, really.
Yeah, yeah.
And it took me about 2 years to speak with different lawyers and figure out. Like that professor had told me in one email that um, uh, we don't have you and I don't have a contract. So what are you talking about? And um, but this is for the benefit of artists, right? We should really know that in the state of Minnesota there's something called a handshake agreement. So any kind of promise, um especially written, like this had signatures and everything, even if it didn't have a 13-page docu-sign or anything.
Mhm. Well,
But
and the money they had received the money,
we
so
had
the money
received
was
the money,
there.
and I
It was
had,
somewhere.
yeah, exactly, and I had
Mhm.
evidence of the fact that they had received the money. The professor told me that the department had the money. And so, I was left wondering, well, are you making a different opera without me? Or like, so all of those things, right? Uh, so after I rejected that inadequate offer, I looked at conciliatory court, because that's what my lawyer advised me to do. Um, and there is something called promissory estoppel, which the you was ultimately guilty of. And I'm saying this because the hearing was public. Now the outcome is public. Like if you tried searching for it, you'll see it. So if an artist or if a party is promised something on the basis of which that party keeps working to their own detriment, and then there's a breach of promise, that is called promissory estoppel. So like I pulled the team together, I continued working towards the success of the opera, investing money in it. People were investing their own funds in it. I paid every single artist on the night of the opera, as promised, not at all negotiated any payments. So everybody got their due, and I paid it out of pocket.
Mhm.
You know, so I was left overnight in this huge monetary debt, which I then had to figure out for 2 years, doors closing, on me, no explanations, no answers whatsoever. Um, but now I know that there is something called promissory estoppel. And if you can prove um, that you worked on the basis of a promise that was ultimately breached, then you can, it's a legit case that you can take to conciliatory court or to the district court, however you want to do it. Um, yeah, and so last month, so in March, we finally had the hearing, and I was absolutely astounded by everything that I heard. The professor say, um, she said something like, this wasn't supposed to be a ticketed show, whereas we have, exchanged emails where I have told her that, let's have a student discount on this, full knowledge that it was going to be a ticketed show, all of that. So, yeah, so there, I don't even know where to, begin to, if I had to do a rebuttal of all the things that I heard in the court case. But it was a really difficult experience. It
Yeah.
was very difficult because uh, I think of myself as, academia adjacent. I'm not opposed to academia, and yet, you see so closely the workings of academic power.
Mm.
'Cause structurally, look at how these grants are set up, right? Like that one person is the conduit of these funds, right? That one faculty under whose name this has gone as as a project, as a proposed project. So that person controls the flow of funds to the community collaborator. So you have to constantly be in the good books of that faculty,
Mm. Mhm.
which
You're beholden in a way.
we're beholden. And I really, to date, I mean, it's very sad because we were friends, you know.
Mm.
Um, so I can only talk about my experience. I can't, speculate what went wrong because nothing adds up. Nothing makes
Right.
sense.
Well, probably you'll never find out. And, at least you, were able to move through the court system to find at least some satisfaction.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, it feels like some semblance of justice because you weren't going crazy. You weren't
Right, right,
completely misrepresenting your own reality, or
right, right. There's
so
validation.
there's validation, there's that vindication. Now that you hear it from the court, yes, of course. I mean, the amount that was that the U was ordered to pay me may not have been a satisfactory amount, but that really depends on the time the hearing officer gets that day, on how you perform that day. So that's really a matter of chance. But in principle, I stand vindicated, which is what to me is the bigger thing. Now I can sleep at night.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You've laid it to rest.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day too, because you persisted in producing the work, despite having to deal with all of this in the background, um, you ended up, having a great success with the piece.
Yeah, yeah.
which is
I
great. And
mean,
you did, like, have a community rallied around you and,
absolutely,
you know yeah.
absolutely. I don't think I could have survived this challenge and like this thing coming from left of field. you know
Yeah.
I couldn't have survived this without the kind of support I had, like, family support, community support, my chosen family. Yeah, it's just been like in every way, sort
Mm,
of staying with me every step of the way. And I'm so glad I actually did it, because there were, of course, days when I said, I can't go ahead with this because I can't be in such a huge debt. But everything was so close to,
yeah,
the final production. Like,
yeah,
people have already invested that much time and labor. How
yeah.
can you turn away
And
from
you
and
yourself.
imagine, right? And imagine not having the creative satisfaction of doing it either. So yeah, I'm so glad I actually went through with it. And that too, I was really pushed by my friends to, just stick it out,
Yeah.
and with
Make
the
this happen,
promise.
we got you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Unmatched. I mean, I feel so lucky with the, network that I have here. It truly is unmatched.
Mm, mm. Oh, well, I'm glad that there is that very, very bright spot, the silver lining of everything.
Yeah.
Um, if people want to experience your work and learn more about you, where's a good place for them to find that information?
So I have a website, ritikaganguly.com.
Can you spell that, please?
Yeah, RITIKAGANGULY. That's one name. .com. So I'm fairly up to date with that. I just am really bad with posting my upcoming events. I always remember updating that upcoming events
Yeah.
agenda after the fact.
Yeah, yeah. Don't
Uh,
worry, you're not the only one.
there's a contact form in there too. Um, and because my work is kind of, spread across the mission driven world, the, arts world, academia, it's kind of all in one place. So the website talks about these different facets of me as a whole person. And then there's a contact form, which I love to hear from people on that form.
And do you have any social media handles that you wanna share?
Yes. So my Instagram handle is Amlaki. So that's AAMALAKI. And that means, that's a fruit, the Indian gooseberry.
That's so sweet. Ritika, thank you so much. It was so much fun to talk to you today. Thank you for sharing about your work and about yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, this was so fun. Thank you so, so much.
And to our audience, thank you for listening. This has been another edition of the Sanguine Arts Locavart podcast.